Hello, I'm Beth Joey and welcome back to my YouTube channel. It is almost the end of 2023, which means it's time to run through my best books of the year, fully expecting that there aren't going to be any new favorites by the end of this year, but if there are, that's a problem for next year me. I'm gonna crack straight in. These books are not in any particular order, not in terms of favorite to least favorite, not in the order I read them, nothing. There's literally just a pile of 23 books next to me and I'm just gonna pick them up and we'll go as we go. First up, we've got November 9 by Colleen Hoover. I know a lot of people had issues with this book. I personally also had those issues, but it provoked the most visceral reaction from me when I was reading it that I could not help but put it on this list, because if something makes me feel, makes me react, makes me angry in the way that this book did, that's a sign that I'm so connected. November 9, if you haven't already heard about it, follows two characters, Fallon and Ben, and Fallon is just about to move across the country. She's an aspiring novelist and I believe they bump into each other on her very last day in LA together and decide that for the many years after that, they're going to meet up every single year on November 9 and have no contact with each other in between times. This book really focuses around those specific November 9s, like November 9 number 1, number 2, number 3, whatever. And I was amazed by how Colleen Hoover was able to take so few days, I think it's like 6 or 7 November 9s in this story, and elongate them in such a way that kept me interested, because there is very little time where you're actually spending it with the characters outside of these November 9s and catching up with what they're doing in their regular day-to-day life. As you'd expect from a Colleen Hoover, it is emotionally destroying and it is drama to the absolute core. There were twists and turns at the end that literally had me wanting to throw my book at the wall. I cannot recommend this enough. Next up, we've got Little Bang by Kelly McCoffrin. This is a book that's actually coming out in January of 2024, but I got an arc of it when I was at YALC this year, and man, am I glad that I picked this up right away, because this book, again, provoked such emotion, such feeling in me that I'm obsessed. I sent a message to the author after reading it being like, thank you for writing this. This is incredible. So it's set in Belfast in 2018 and it follows good girl Mel and sort of rough around the edges from the wrong side of the tracks Sid, and they've been pining after each other for a really long time until one New Year's Eve, I believe it's Sid's birthday, and they have sex. Mel ends up finding out a couple of weeks later that she is pregnant, and they are forced into this incredibly frustrating and dramatic and tumultuous situation where Sid and Mel, clearly at the age that they're at, I think they're in high school, are not ready to bring a baby into this world, but Mel's family is incredibly religious, does not believe in abortion, and I believe it's not even legal where they live. And so Sid is just trying to make things work, trying to turn his life around, trying to put things together, get a job in order to become a father, which he seems to think that he wants, while Mel is dealing with this internal conflict of, do I actually want this, or am I just doing what everyone else is telling me to do? It has a very important conversations around abortion and the pro-choice, pro-life movement. It discusses a young woman's right to choose her own future amidst a society that isn't allowing her to do so, and I just think this book is incredible. It's only baby short, but it packs a real punch. Next up, on a lighter note, we have Heartless by Elsie Silver. This is the first book that I read in the Chestnut Springs series, but I believe it's the second book in the actual series. And this one follows Cade Easton, who is a single father just looking for a full-time nanny to come and take care of his son, but he finds that more of the nannies that he interviews are more interested in him than they are in his son. So he's really just struggling to find someone. So I think he goes to his family, and his sister-in-law, or soon-to-be sister-in-law, whose romance is covered in the previous book, recommends her friend Willa, who's a bit of a free spirit, doesn't really know what she wants to do with her life. Cade brings on Willa to look after his young son Luke, and of course, nanny, father, romance, beautiful sort of found family, single dad trope. I mean, this book was so sweet, so swoony, so incredible. The smut was amazing, and it had me just so keen to read the rest of the series, which I did. I just smashed them all out one after the other. I haven't read the most recent one, which I think is Hopeless, but I'm really anticipating that one. On to another romance, we've got Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail by Ashley Herring Blake. This is the second out of 3 books, I think, in this series, and I can't remember what the full name of the series is. This one follows Astrid Parker, who is an interior designer, and after the events of the first book, Delilah Green Doesn't Care, her whole life is just completely thrown from a loop and she is spiraling. She's offered the opportunity to work on a sort of interior design show to spruce up up an old inn in the town that she lives in, only to find out that the sort of main lead on the project is a member of the family who owns the inn and vehemently disagrees with every single design decision that Astrid makes. And her name is Jordan. A determination to fight with each other over everything turns into some light sabotage to ruffle some feathers, which of course turns into sexual tension, and the two fall in love. I think the thing that I loved about this book was the way it dealt with both of these women at a point in their lives where they had to make a choice. They had to decide what they wanted for their future. And the way they supported each other through that, I think, was really interesting. And I think as well, the way they manipulated their situation in order to let each other live out kind of what they wanted from them, from their lives, was also really interesting. So loved this book and cannot wait to read Iris Kelly Doesn't Date, which is now out, but I haven't picked it up yet. Next up, we've got the second Colleen Hoover for this video, and that is It Ends With Us. I hadn't read this book before this year, and I picked it up in anticipation of the movie coming out because I know a lot of those announcements about cast and all those sorts of things were coming out this year. This book, you've probably heard all about it and what it's about, but if you've been living under a rock, this book follows Lily, who I believe on the evening of her father's funeral, she goes up to a rooftop and kind of reevaluates her life, and there she meets Ryle, and they decide to have a one-night stand, which is then interrupted by Ryle being called back to the hospital because he's a doctor, and Lily kind of brushes this off as a missed opportunity until I think a couple months later she bumps into him again and they strike up a romance and things get real serious real fast. At the same time, Lily stumbles across all of her old letters and journals that she'd sort of written to Ellen DeGeneres, which is what she named her diary, back in the day, which chronicles her first love, her romance with a young homeless boy in high school named Atlas. Massive trigger warnings for this book. It deals with themes of domestic violence and I believe suicide as well, but it really is such a beautiful, moving, romantic story. I love the sequel to it. It Starts With Us. I fully understand that that was massively fan service, but it was still super fun, and this book had me tearing up. I think the writing was beautiful. I think the way it dealt with the situation between Lily and Ryle was very mature, and it even made me cry even more because I found out that this book is actually sort of inspired by Colleen Hoover's mother's own experience, which made the whole story feel way, way, way more real. In the vein of mature, incredible, and emotional read, next up we have Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This book tore me up. It tells the story of the last woman to be executed for murder in Iceland. It's set in northern Iceland in 1829, where a woman is sent to live with a family pending her execution. And that family, as you can expect, is really not happy about it. But over the course of the novel, they get to know her, they get to know her story, they get to know the circumstances around this murder. You also have this priest, this young priest that's involved in the story that this woman has selected to, you know, comfort her and console her and take her through the grieving process of losing her own life. And it just tells Agnes, the main character's story, about what led to this point and the connection she makes with this family who gets to know her and understand her. And it is this beautiful found family story, and it is so heartbreaking because I spent the entire book wanting so badly for some Hail Mary to happen that would cancel the whole execution and that would be like, oh, she's redeemed, amazing, cool, let's just like move on and pretend this never happened. But you kind of spend the whole book knowing that that's not gonna happen, and it doesn't in any way minimize the heartbreak that you feel at the end. It makes it even worse because you deal with those immediately pre-execution moments from Agnes where she is terrified about what's going to happen to her, and the family is so brokenhearted, and it's just, I could rant and rave about how amazing this book is, as well as the atmosphere is cold and wintry and dark and mysterious, and it's eerie and incredible. Next up, we've got The Mysterious Affair at Styles by Agatha Christie. This is the first book in the Hercule Poirot world, and it got me obsessed. It got me fully obsessed, so obsessed with Agatha Christie. I haven't actually gone and read any more in the Hercule Poirot world, but it has me really wanting to, so that I guess makes me obsessed. This follows Hercule Poirot, who is recruited to solve a mysterious murder that happens at Styles Manor, which I believe is named after somewhere that Agatha Christie actually lived. I can't remember. And he recruits his friend and I guess village idiot, Captain Arthur Hastings, to assist him in this matter because Arthur Hastings is the one that let him know what was happening. Basically, the matriarch of the family dies and her fortune is up for grabs, and Hercule Poirot is trying to figure out who had the greatest motive to off this woman, with the whole money and fortune at play, with complicated family dynamics, with affairs and all sorts of things happening at the same time. It is dramatic, it is twisty-turny. I love how it's a pure play sort of fair mystery and that it does give you all the clues that you need to solve the mystery, but man, there are so many red herrings. I did not solve it when I was reading through it and trying to solve it on the go. I did not solve it, I did not get the correct answer, but the actual answer made a ton of sense. I think this is an absolutely amazing read and I cannot wait to read more from this author. In the vein of another book that kind of feels like a classic in the same way that Agatha Christie does, we have The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. This is the sequel, or I guess spin-off, to The Handmaid's Tale. This follows directly on from the events of that story and follows a character in that story who definitely wasn't well liked by probably anyone that read the book. But it really tells the story of the impact of the decisions of that woman and how it changed the lives of many of the other women in society, and how her actions and her experiences really inspired other women to make a stand and take moves on their own. I'm going to read you the blurb because I don't fully remember a lot of the intimate details of this story. And it says, "The Republic of Gilead is beginning to rot from within. At this crucial moment, two girls with radically different experiences of the regime come face to face with the legendary, ruthless Aunt Lydia. But how far will each go for what she believes?" This story is incredible because it swaps between those different timelines of the three different women, and the way their lives intersect by the end of the story I think is really interesting. It is so moving. It has a whole section at the end which I really love, which is going through all the documents that Margaret Atwood used to compose her own story, The Handmaid's Tale, back when it first came out. This came out obviously years and years after, but the way it expands on the world I think is so fascinating, and I would recommend it to anyone who enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale or just really wants to see a really oppressive world devolve. Next up, we've got A Really Good Actually by Monica Hazy. This is a fascinating book and it's honestly so funny. This follows a woman whose name I cannot remember, Maggie, whose marriage has ended roughly a year after it began, and she is spiraling. She is reevaluating her life. She's reevaluating jumping back into the dating world. She is reevaluating her own life choices, and you are dragged along for the ride. There are chapter breaks throughout the story. After every sort of narrative style chapter, you'll have a chapter break that goes, oh, these are the 20 things that I searched on Google recently, or these are a couple emails that I sent recently, and just like random things that really, really place you exactly in the moment of what's happening to this character. So one of them is well-meaning conversations with loved ones truncated at the exact moment they start to bring up kintsugi. Can't remember who kintsugi is or what kintsugi is, but anyway, this book is really funny. It's written by someone who I think wrote for Schitt's Creek, so it's got that kind of humor to it. And I think it's fascinating because you are very much on the side of the main character throughout the story until you realize that maybe she's been lying to you the entire time. And the way she experiences this whole situation and this whole heartbreak is very different to what's actually happening. And the way her sort of facade and her belief of how things are going devolves throughout the story and just completely spirals is so entertaining and so horrible and so interesting. And I can't say enough how amazing this book is, and the way it deals with a loss in the same way that she's dealt with it, and how it can completely send someone spiraling. Next up, we've got The Bridge Kingdom, which was a reread for me, and as you can tell, I annotated the living shite out of this book because I loved it and because I loved the experience of reading it. I had such a visceral reaction when I was reading this book, and that's a big part of why I love it. So as for what this book is about, it follows Lara, who is a princess, and she's been raised as a warrior by the king of the land that she lives in, who is also her father, alongside a number of her sisters. There's quite a few of them, but I can't remember the total number. And she's been raised on one thing, which is that King Aaron of the Bridge Kingdom is despicable. He is a tyrant, and he is cutting off her own family's livelihood and her own kingdom's livelihood. So she's been raised by her father alongside her sisters to be sent to the Bridge Kingdom in order to take it apart from the inside. Through a somewhat despicable and kind of sabotagey turn of events, Princess Lara ends up being the sister selected to go to the Bridge Kingdom, marry the king, and tear it apart from the inside. But she finds out when she's there that the brainwashing that she's received in her own kingdom is maybe not the true story, and she begins to see a completely other side and begins to wonder who the real enemy actually is as she spends more and more time with King Aaron. It's a fantasy romance. Obviously, it's a little bit enemies to lovers, and it is all-time swoony, and I absolutely love this read. I have read it 2 times now, and I haven't read the sequel yet, and I don't know why. I just don't immediately pick it up after reading this because I get taken on to something else that might interest me, but I do need to read the sequel soon because I am really, really keen to see how this story ends and to see how the spin-off series from this one will continue. Next up, we've got Twin Crowns by Catherine Doyle and Catherine Weber, and this book was just absolutely fascinating to me, and I cannot wait to pick up the sequel, but I'm waiting to read it until the next book comes out because I want to read them one after the other. As for what this book is about, it follows 2 sisters who are twins who were separated at birth, and one was poised and prepared and everything to rule the kingdom one day, and the other one was taken off to live with the witches, who are very much ostracized and banished by the kingdom. A kingdom which very much, you know, does not like witches, and they're actively persecuting them. As they've been growing up, the sister that's been living with the witches has kind of been prepared all her life to eventually do a bit of a twin swap and take the place of the princess twin, take over the kingdom and bring the witches back into play, give them a bit of the power that was taken back away from them. And this twin swap happens, and this book kind of takes you through what happens as a result of this twin swap. So it takes you through the twin coming into the kingdom and taking over, and all the sort of machinations and sabotaging and all the sorts of things that she has to undertake in order to meet her goals. But it also takes you through the perspective of the other sister who's been raised as a princess and raised to believe she's doing the right thing. Once she's taken to the witches and sees how the other side of this war is kind of playing out, it takes you through her eyes being opened up, and it's so interesting seeing everything that she believed kind of be taken away from her. There also is a romance in this storyline, so I think you have an enemies to lovers on one side and then a strangers to friends to lovers on the other side, and I loved both of them. And I think the point at which this book ended was a big cliffhanger, and I cannot wait to find out what happens next, but you know, I'll pick it up eventually. Next up, we have a book that brought me to tears over and over and over again, and by the end of it had me actually bawling, and that is In Memoriam by Alice Wynne. This is the most beautiful story I have ever read, the most beautiful romance, the most beautiful historical, like World War I historical book I've ever read, and it was just incredible. I'm speechless when I think about this book. It follows 2 boys who befriended each other in school, and then World War I breaks out, and one of them is sent off to the war to fight because his mother is German and she's dealing with a lot of anti-German prejudice. So he's sent off to the war to fight to kind of recover his family's reputation, and he keeps sending letters back to his friends saying, don't follow me, don't follow me, don't follow me. But they're friends, they're best friends, and his friends want to support him. So he follows him, and they end up in the war together, separated and brought back together over and over again, dealing with the tragedies of World War I, like losing friends and dealing with trauma and battle wounds and scars, whilst also trying to foster this beautiful love and relationship between the 2 of them, which is so not allowed at the time. Like, they could be executed if their romance was found out by their superiors. The reason why this book had me in absolute tears is because of that romance, because of those sweet moments, but also because by the end of the story, it lulls you into this false sense of security and this happily ever after, only to literally crush it by the end. I think another thing that I found really fascinating about this book is when I went to Waterstones to see the author speak about it in more detail, I found out that this whole story kind of came to life when she was looking through the In Memoriam papers at Oxford, where basically the students of Oxford, as they found out that their classmates had passed away in the war, they would write little In Memoriam sections in their papers to, you know, keep people updated on the lives of the students who were fighting in the war. And this whole book was inspired by those In Memoriam papers. Apparently some of the entries in this story are actually real entries, which makes it really come to life even more on top of the fictional entries as well. Absolutely incredible read. It is so moving, so heartbreaking, so bittersweet, so heartwarming and wholesome, and it's just it's an experience that I would 100% recommend. Next up, we've got Her Majesty's Royal Coven by Juno Dawson. This book follows 4 witches, I believe, who grew up together, best friends, and then were separated through the experience of their lives, and they kind of went off on different paths until one day the prophesied Sully child kind of comes into being, and they are forced to kind of come back together and work together to figure out how they're going to deal with this, because this Sully child has the potential to destroy the world, and these 4 women very much disagree on what they're going to do about it. The reason I love this book so much is because it has very, very important conversations around child welfare and in mental health, as well as being transgender, and it's just the conversations that it has and the commentary on society are just incredible. I love that it's sort of placed in the real world, and that, you know, this book and the sequel kind of mentions moments like Brexit and the Queen passing, and it pulls from history and it ties historical female monarchs to this Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which just makes the whole thing feel real. Like, I feel like if I went to the town where this was set, I could go and meet all of these witches. It just felt really real, as well as incredibly terrifying and fantastic. There is a little bit of a romance in here. There is some family drama in here. It is an incredible read. Next up, we've got Final Offer by Lauren Asher, which is the 3rd book in the Dreamland Billionaires series. I did enjoy the 1st and 2nd book, don't get me wrong, but this 3rd book was incredible on a whole nother level because it was emotional on a whole nother level. It follows Callahan, who is the 3rd Kane brother. I think he's the middle child. I can't remember, and he's a washed up athlete and a high functioning alcoholic. That is how he defines himself. And he's been given the challenge in his grandfather's will to go to the family lake house and turn it around and I think sell it within a year. Once he arrives though, he finds that his old flame Alana is living there and fully believes that she owns this house. So they kind of have to work together to figure out what they are going to do about it. Alana is kind of trying to lightly sabotage him because she just wants to stay in her house. She's got a young child, and that adds another level of complication. Callahan is obviously dealing with being a recovering alcoholic and everything relating to that and withdrawals and his addiction. But it also just wraps up the story of these 3 brothers in the most beautiful way. And I loved this book. It was so emotional. It was heartbreaking, but it was swoony, and it had that typical Lauren Asher sort of heartwarming swooniness that I found in the other 2 books as well. And I cannot wait to read more from this author because this series was amazing. We're almost at the end, I promise. The next book is Weather Girl by Rachel Lynn Solomon. This again was another sort of emotional swoony read, but it definitely had that hint of banter and fun to it that I really enjoyed. This one follows Ari Abrams, who's working as a TV meteorologist, and it's her absolute dream job, but unfortunately her mentor ain't mentoring, and she really wants to do something about that. So her and Russell kind of drunkenly hatch a plan to get their bosses back together, because what seems to be distracting their bosses from actually mentoring them is their sort of tumultuous relationship that they have with each other. But as they kind of work to help these sparring exes fall back in love, they realize that maybe there's some chemistry between them too. But I think the thing that really makes this book special is the way it deals with the situations revolving around the main characters themselves and how it brings this sort of swoony, bantery romance into that. So you have all the fun and the banter and the almost practical jokes of like trying to set up their bosses and how that ends up with these 2 characters in some really sticky situations. But then you also have this sort of beautiful, heartwarming storyline of, I think Ari has anxiety and depression, so it's covering how that impacts her life and how she's able to live her life and combat that, and how Russell gets involved in that. But then also you've got Russell, who is a sports presenter at the TV station, but he is plus sized. So he's dealing with this sort of conflict of not physically meeting the stereotype he's expected to meet, I guess, as a sports presenter. And I just love the conversations around mental health, physical health, and how it's all bundled up together with this fun, bantery romance. Next up, we've got another very emotional romance that I was massively hesitating to read for the longest time, because I didn't want this series to end, and also because everyone had told me this was way more emotional than its predecessors, and I was scared by that because I loved the fun fun lightheartedness of the predecessors. Anyway, enough rambling. The book is The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This is the third book in this series. It's got the Kiss Quotient, the Bride Test, and the Heart Principle. And this book follows an absolute violin prodigy. Her name is Anna Sun, and she accidentally achieves sort of overnight fame when a YouTube video of her playing violin goes absolutely viral. Add to the struggle of dealing with this overnight fame, her, I think, 5-year boyfriend suddenly comes up to her and says he wants an open relationship, and she kind of decides in revenge she is going to just embark on a string of one-night stands because, hey, they're open, right? In this process, she meets Kwan, who is a tattooed motorbike riding small business owner, and they attempt to have a one-night stand, but it fails. And so does their second attempt, and so does their third attempt, but they realize that maybe there's an emotional connection between them that they need to explore a little more. Add to that a very complicated element around being a carer for a very, very sick and ailing family member that Anna deals with, and how that impacts on the relationships around you, both in your family and romantically. And you have got a swoon-worthy, heartbreaking, bittersweet, wholesome story that had me in tears, or on the edge of tears, many, many, many times. Next up, we've got Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. This book was an unexpected fave. It tells the sort of true story of the lives that inspired Shakespeare's play Hamlet. So, similar name, as you can tell. It follows a young girl and boy who are siblings in 1596 in Stratford-upon-Avon, and the girl is taken to her bed with a very, very deadly sickness, and so the boy does everything he can to get his family to her, get help for her. I'll read the blurb to you, it's amazing. Their mother, Agnes, is over a mile away in the garden where she grows medicinal herbs. Their father is working in London. Neither parent knows that Hamnet, the son, will not survive the week. Hamnet is a novel inspired by the son of a famous playwright, a boy whose life has been all but forgotten, but whose name was given to one of the most celebrated plays ever written. I literally have goosebumps reading that blurb because it was an incredible story. I think the way it took you through this young boy's struggle as he was just trying to get help for his sister, the way he was overlooked, the way it went into the perspectives of all his different family members as well, and how they were so unaware of what's going on. It tells you the story of William Shakespeare that you never even knew, and it was just incredibly written and so moving, and it had me turning pages and losing track of time in a way that doesn't very often happen with just historical fiction. Next up, a very, very recent release and very, very recent read for me. In fact, I think it's the last book that I read, is Heartstopper Volume 5. This book, and every time a new Heartstopper book comes out, it's going to end up on my favorites of the year because I'm obsessed with this series. It follows Nick and Charlie, who are two young boys who fall in love in high school. It covers everything from mental health representation, bullying in school, eating disorders, understanding your sexuality, understanding how your sexuality can change, what happens after school, young love. It's just an amazing, amazing book. I've always said that these graphic novels should be required reading in school because it just covers so many different things that young people need to understand can happen to everyone, and that it's okay and you're not alone. I think the art style of this is so innocent and beautiful, but also so expressive. I think the romance between Nick and Charlie is so wholesome. I love the friendships that they make, and I love that every story, whilst it sort of continues in this one storyline between Nick and Charlie, it has its own sort of plot arc. And in this one, it was all about Nick and Charlie coming to terms with how their life's going to change when Nick goes off to university and Charlie still has one more year left of school, as well as Charlie's recovery from his eating disorder that was very much covered and delved into in Volume 4. 100% recommend this book. If you haven't read it, or if you haven't read the series, it's incredible. So those were my best books of 2023. I think I said at the beginning of this video that there were going to be 23 of them, but that's wrong. There weren't 23, there were 19. So apologies for that somewhat little bit of a lie at the beginning of the video. These were all incredible, incredible books, and so many of them have sequels coming out next year that I cannot be more excited for. And so many of them are new favorite authors, new order by authors. But as always, let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, or just what you're reading at the moment, loving it, hating it, all that kind of thing. Come and chat to me in the comments down below. I love talking to you guys, and I do my best to reply to every single comment. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please do let me know by liking, subscribing, and hitting that notification bell all down below. It's a super, super easy way to help my channel grow, and I will see you lovely people in my next video. Bye!